Iran launched a ballistic missile at an American airbase in Kuwait. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps announced it openly and confirmed it through state media, justifying the strike as a proportional response to American attacks on Iranian assets during the ceasefire period. The IRGC has repeatedly applied this logic over several weeks, creating a cycle of strikes and counterstrikes. The ceasefire exists in name only, with daily military exchanges continuing even as negotiators in Doha work on a deal that neither side can publicly announce while their forces remain active. CENTCOM responded, not with a simple diplomatic note or formal protest, but with a combination of public condemnation and military action. 5 one-way attack drones were destroyed. A 6th launch was prevented by striking a drone ground control station in Bandar Abbas, and a radar network on Qashm Island eliminated a 2nd control station in Gorj. 2 additional attack drones in flight were intercepted. The U.S. president issued a public statement signaling both Americans and the Iranian leadership that Iran was negotiating from a position of weakness and that any further action would be decided on Washington's timeline. The sequence of events shows deliberate management by one side and reactive panic on the other. On May 27th, Iran launched a ballistic missile at the Kuwait air base, intercepted successfully by Kuwaiti forces. CENTCOM described the strike as an egregious ceasefire violation and emphasized that it followed earlier Iranian attacks involving 5 one-way drones near the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's 5 drones were intercepted, and a 6th launch was prevented by targeting the ground control station before deployment. When Iran fired the ballistic missile, Kuwaiti defenses intercepted it, though debris caused minor damage. The American response included strikes on Qashm Island and Goro over the weekend. U.S. forces engaged the ground control stations preemptively, acting under rules of engagement that allow strikes against imminent threats. This operational approach denies Iran the ability to use its remaining offensive capabilities effectively. Each preparation to launch a drone triggers an American strike that neutralizes it before it becomes airborne. Iran faces the choice of not using the weapon or losing the infrastructure that enables its use. CENTCOM confirmed that all 5 drones were intercepted and a 6th launch was prevented, while U.S. forces and regional partners remained vigilant against further threats. President Donald Trump, in a cabinet meeting on May 28th, described Iran as negotiating on fumes, stating that their Navy and Air Force are effectively gone. He emphasized that the negotiations occur from a position of no remaining leverage. U.S. naval operations eliminated 95% of Iran's surface combatants during the opening phase of Operation Epic Fury. The remaining vessels avoided destruction by hiding or dispersing. Iranian combat aviation suffered severe losses, leaving mostly aging F-4 Phantoms, F-14 Tomcats, and Su-24 strike aircraft incapable of meaningful combat against American and coalition forces. The IRGC Air Force cannot contest Iranian airspace against U.S. strike packages in any operationally significant way. Whatever capabilities Iran still retains on paper, the phrase, "everything's gone," reflects a broader reality. Before February 28th, Iran possessed a combined military structure that included naval forces, combat aviation, air defense systems, missile batteries positioned for deployment, and a network responsible for drone command and control. Through the opening phase of the conflict and continuing self-defense operations during the ceasefire period, those capabilities have been steadily reduced. What remains is not insignificant. Iran still maintains a ballistic missile inventory with meaningful potential. Its underground nuclear facilities continue to benefit from geological protection that current weapons packages have not completely overcome. Ground forces under the IRGC also possess assets that have not yet been targeted. However, the offensive power intended to support a long-term closure of the Strait of Hormuz is being dismantled piece by piece. The ability to threaten commercial traffic and military shipping, and to deny access to the waterway through sustained contested operations against American and coalition naval forces, is shrinking. Every drone deployment, every activation of a radar installation, every launch platform brought online, and every drone control center that becomes active exposes another target for American strike operations. The phrase, "negotiating on fumes," describes Washington's view of Tehran's position at the bargaining table. A party negotiates on fumes when its influence rests more on what it might still do in the future than on what it can accomplish immediately. Iran's remaining leverage in the Doha talks comes from the possibility of reopening the Strait of Hormuz. That prospect carries major value for the global economy and offers a path toward ending a conflict whose costs continue to affect economies worldwide through disruptions in oil supplies. That leverage remains real. It explains why negotiations reportedly produced a tentative framework that a senior Arab official said was finalized in Doha 3 days earlier. Yet that leverage is also tied to capabilities that are disappearing. The military structure intended to maintain a permanent closure strategy through mining operations, threats against shipping, and armed contestation of the waterway, is being degraded at a pace that negotiations must outrun. If the military capability vanishes first, The leverage disappears with it. The ballistic missile launched against the American facility in Kuwait represents the IRGC's institutional response to this situation. The organization cannot allow American forces to continue eliminating drone and radar infrastructure at Kesh Island, Goro, and Bandar Abbas without demonstrating that it can still impose costs on U.S. military assets. If American strikes are absorbed without a response, the deterrence logic supporting the IRGC's institutional role begins to unravel. If it answers, using the capabilities still available, including ballistic missiles, drone attacks, and strikes against coalition facilities in Gulf states, it consumes limited resources while provoking additional American retaliation. Those exchanges accelerate the depletion of capability described by the fumes metaphor. The missile strike against the American base in Kuwait should therefore not be interpreted as evidence of growing strength. It reflects an organization compelled to prove that it can still reach an American installation. The alternative, remaining silent after CENTCOM destroyed the Bandar Abbas drone control facility, would have signaled to domestic audiences and regional adversaries that the IRGC could no longer answer American military action with anything capable of reaching U.S. territory or bases. The IRGC launched the Fate 110 missile toward Ali Salm not because it expected to bypass Patriot defenses and achieve a decisive military result. The missile was fired because failing to respond after the destruction of the Bandar Abbas control site would have communicated weakness. Kuwait's Ministry of Foreign Affairs condemned the attack and declared that the nation retains the right to protect itself against threats and aggression. Kuwaiti officials described the strike as a direct danger to civilians and critical infrastructure. The ministry also acknowledged ongoing peace efforts and argued that such attacks damaged diplomatic progress. Kuwait's official response, including strong condemnation, references to self-defense, and warnings about harm to negotiations, reflects the reality that the country has become the geographic stage for confrontation in which it has no direct stake except as a victim. Kuwait hosts American forces under defense agreements that existed long before the current conflict. By targeting American facilities located there, the IRGC has brought Iranian military operations into Kuwaiti territory, Kuwaiti airspace, and the lives of Kuwaiti civilians who hear warning sirens, witness disruptions to commercial aviation, and bear the physical and psychological burden of a conflict that is not their own. The language used by Kuwait's foreign ministry, describing criminal attacks, violations of sovereignty and security, and threats to civilian lives and essential facilities, forms the formal diplomatic record of what Kuwait believes is being done to it. Each statement also increases the political and diplomatic costs imposed on Iran's relations with neighboring Gulf states. Kuwait's traditional neutrality, which Iran could once rely upon as at least non-hostile, has gradually shifted toward official criticism because of the decision to use Kuwaiti territory as the arena for retaliation against American military actions. That shift carries consequences beyond the immediate exchange. It strengthens Gulf alignment with the American coalition and narrows the diplomatic flexibility available to Iran in future crisis management. At the same time, these military decisions are unfolding alongside an active diplomatic process. The attack on the American base in Kuwait, drone operations near the Strait, the Fate 110 launched at Ali al-Salam, additional ballistic missile activity, and Monday morning salvos being engaged by air defense systems are all occurring while negotiations continue in Doha. According to a senior Arab official, an agreement was effectively completed 3 days earlier, with both parties waiting for the final announcement while each side hesitates for the other to move first. Iran's Supreme Leader Moshtaba Kameh sent a message to Parliament urging lawmakers not to allow political disagreements to become divisions. The message came as Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf leads Tehran's negotiating delegation in discussions with the United States. Issued to mark the anniversary of the opening of Iran's parliament, the message arrived shortly after lawmakers resumed public sessions following the war. Kameh thanked Parliament members and specifically praised Ghalibaf's efforts, though he avoided direct mention of negotiations with Washington. That praise carries significance. Ghalibaf serves as parliamentary speaker and heads the Iranian negotiating team. When Kameh publicly commends his efforts while simultaneously urging legislators not to let political disagreements become division, the message is clear to domestic political audiences. The communication suggests that the negotiating team's work deserves support rather than factional resistance. It does not resemble the behavior of a leader uninterested in an agreement. Instead, it reflects an effort to shape a political environment capable of supporting a deal that appears to have been accepted in substance. The challenge comes from Iran's fractured post-war political landscape. Parliament has only recently resumed public sessions. State media has been marked by conflict between the pro-negotiation Tasni news faction and the pro-IRGC hardline Raja news faction. Reports also indicate that the civilian president offered his resignation because of IRGC institutional influence. Within that environment came his appeal for unity, and his praise for the parliamentary speaker directing the nuclear talks carry additional weight. Meanwhile, The IRGC's military actions and Kamei's diplomatic messaging are moving in opposite directions at the same time. The IRGC launches a Fate 110 missile at an American base in Kuwait. The Supreme Leader publicly supports the parliamentary speaker leading negotiations. Both developments are real. Both are happening simultaneously. The reason they can coexist is that the institutional logic of the IRGC and Kamei's calculations for regime survival are not identical. The IRGC benefits from continued confrontation because conflict reinforces its dominant role within Iranian society. Kamei, by contrast, requires an end to the conflict under terms that can be presented as something other than total surrender. The survival of the regime after the war depends on the Supreme Leader's ability to describe the outcome as something other than defeat. The American response to the Kuwait base attack has been structured in a way that steadily makes that political task more difficult. Each American strike that removes another segment of Iran's military structure before an agreement is finalized takes away one more asset the IRGC cannot claim to have protected through resistance. Every drone control facility shut down, every radar installation destroyed, and every attack drone intercepted before reaching its objective becomes further evidence that Iranian military capacity is being steadily reduced whether a deal is ultimately signed or not. If an agreement is completed while Iran's forces remain in their current weakened condition, the IRGC cannot argue that negotiations occurred from a position of strength. If no agreement emerges and American operations continue under the self-defense framework, Iran will possess less capability next week than it has today, and less capability a month from now than it has next week. President Donald Trump's remarks during the May 28th cabinet meeting reflected this dynamic directly. He stated that Iran's navy is gone, its air force is gone, everything is gone. He described the country as negotiating on fumes. That language does not present negotiations as taking place between two parties holding equal leverage. It reflects the view that one side has largely exhausted its military resources, while the other has not. According to that assessment, the imbalance itself defines the negotiating environment. Continued IRGC military activity during the ceasefire does not reverse that condition. It only speeds up the process. A separate security concern emerged from the current exchange. A bipartisan group of lawmakers warned the Pentagon that commercial location information could expose where American troops gather and reveal their daily routines, making them vulnerable to missile strikes, drone attacks, and roadside bombs. American personnel stationed in Kuwait use smartphones. Those devices generate location information that commercial data brokers can sell. The behavioral patterns created by those phones, regular gatherings near flight lines, scheduled shift changes at drone operation facilities, and consistent meal periods at base dining halls provide precisely the kind of intelligence an adversary could use to improve strike timing and targeting. The Fate 110 missile attack that wounded 5 Americans near the Ali Salam flight line may have benefited from prior knowledge of peak activity periods. Commercially available location information could potentially provide such insight through channels that bypass traditional intelligence restrictions. The possibility that personal devices used by American service members might indirectly supply targeting intelligence to the IRGC represents the specific vulnerability highlighted by the bipartisan warning. The pattern observed during the ceasefire period, including the timing of IRGC attacks relative to activity levels on American installations, suggests that operational pattern of life information may be contributing to targeting decisions. Commercial location data remains one of the most accessible sources for obtaining such information without conducting conventional intelligence operations. America's response over the weekend consisted of a layered operation spanning 2 days and 2 separate geographic areas. The objective was not merely to address immediate threats, but also to target the systems enabling future attacks. CENTCOM reported that Kuwaiti forces successfully intercepted the ballistic missile, while U.S. forces destroyed all attacking drones. American personnel also prevented a 6th drone launch from a ground control site in Bandar Abbas. The command stated that U.S. Central Command and regional partners remained vigilant and measured while defending their forces and interests against what it described as unjustified Iranian aggression. The words vigilant and measured carry diplomatic significance. Vigilant means continuous observation. Measured means proportional action. Rather than initiating the full escalation potential available within the assembled military structure, the response focused on eliminating specific threats while avoiding a return to major combat operations that ongoing diplomacy could not withstand. Every American action during the ceasefire has been presented as measured. Each strike has targeted a particular Iranian capability node, rather than the broad infrastructure campaign represented by Operation Epic Fury and its 5,000 targets over 10 days. The restraint is genuine. CENTCOM is not conducting a seizure of Karg Island. It is not carrying out landings on Abu Musa and Tony Island. It is not launching an amphibious assault on Kashum Island. Instead, operations are directed toward radar systems, drone infrastructure, and launch facilities, whose activity creates threats covered by existing self-defense authorizations. Yet the cumulative effect remains significant. Strike after strike, target after target, radar network after radar network, drone control station after drone control station. Each response to an Iranian ceasefire violation removes another component of the military structure that provides the IRGC with its remaining leverage. Because each action remains limited, no single strike is large enough to force a major Iranian escalation or trigger a return to full-scale combat. However, the combined effect means every additional day of this violent and disorderly ceasefire leaves the IRGC in a weaker position relative to the United States. This is the aspect of the American response that defines its severity. The impact does not come from one overwhelming attack. It comes from a strategic system built around patience, legality, diplomatic framing, and operational precision. Iranian military capabilities continue to be removed during a ceasefire officially acknowledged by both sides, even as military exchanges continue. The IRGC launches a missile at an American installation in Kuwait. CENTCOM responds by destroying a drone control site in Bandar Abbas, eliminating a radar network on Qeshm Island, striking another drone control facility in Goro, intercepting 2 attack drones already airborne, destroying 5 attack drones approaching the strait, and preventing a 6th launch before it begins. The exchange ratio is not equal. At every stage, the imbalance favors the American side. Capabilities are destroyed. Capabilities are degraded. Capabilities are prevented from being deployed. Capabilities disappear from future Iranian planning calculations. Iran struck a U.S. airbase. The American response was severe in a very specific way. Not through a single decisive blow, but through a continuous process that removes military nodes whose activation created the justification for targeting them permanently. Trump stated that Iran was negotiating on fumes. Trump also said that perhaps the United States would need to return and finish the job, and perhaps it would not. That uncertainty represents the diplomatic space in which the Doha Agreement currently exists. According to reports, the framework was completed in substance 3 days earlier. Public announcement has not occurred because both sides are still working through the political requirements necessary for domestic audiences. The fumes are the military resources Iran continues to spend during each ceasefire period exchange. Every new exchange that leaves the ceasefire technically intact while reducing additional Iranian military capability makes those fumes thinner than they were the previous day. Kuwait's military announced that its air defense systems intercepted incoming missiles and drones on Thursday, though officials did not specify the intended targets. Before the April ceasefire began, Kuwait repeatedly faced attacks from Iran and Iranian-backed Shiite militias operating in Iraq. Now interceptions are occurring again. On June 1st, 2026, air defense sirens sound across Kuwait. Commercial flights are diverted. Incoming aircraft enter holding patterns above the Gulf. The base targeted by Iran and the American response that followed both exist within a ceasefire that was intended to provide negotiators in Doha with time to finalize an agreement reportedly completed 3 days earlier. The framework is finished. Military operations continue. The IRGC continues launching ballistic missiles. CENTCOM continues striking radar networks and drone control facilities. Kuwait continues intercepting incoming threats. The fumes continue burning. And the announcement needed to transform the Doha framework into a formally declared agreement still has not arrived. If you found this analysis valuable, stay informed and follow for future updates on military, political, and geopolitical developments as this story continues to evolve. Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.